Phil here in the layer by layer lair, and this is my Apertura AD8 Dobsonian telescope. I love this thing, except for one issue. It came with just one holder for eyepieces with one 2-inch slot and three 1¼ inch slots. And I ran out of 2-inch slots pretty much instantly. But this shortfall is an opportunity for my first functional design and print. For this mission, I relied heavily on Teaching Tech's video that is linked in the description that walks through the making of a tool holder, so check that out for more detailed instructions. Let's blast off into OnShape and get this mission started. It began with the fairly standard and cliche step of adding a rectangle, which I sized to match the existing metal eyepiece holder. I used circles to punch out holes measuring 52mm for the 2-inch eyepieces and 32mm for the 1¼ inch eyepieces, and made it match the existing layout to the one that came with the scope. I then played around with the thickness of the piece using the extrude command before settling on 3mm. I also managed to round the corners without much hassle, which was a pleasant departure from my usual issues with such a task. With all that, it was off to a test print of just the holder portion to make sure everything would fit. Thank goodness for that, because the 1¼ inch eyepieces ended up being just a bit too tight. I increased the diameter of the hole by 1mm and did another test print, which worked out nicely. We have liftoff. Now I had to add a back wall and supports. Though I didn't quite understand it at first, I figured out I needed to add a new sketch on top that I would extrude out and then eventually merge all together with the Boolean modifier later. For the supports, I created a triangle between 3 points and thickened it, but had a heck of a time mirroring it to the other side. Could I have just recreated the simple shape on the other side and saved myself a bit of time? Yes, but that would be the easy way. I do this not because it is easy, but because it is a small challenge I think is achievable in the time I have. The solution was to create an empty plane in the middle of the object, which I could then use as a target to mirror across. With that figured out, I just needed to add 4.5mm holes to the back for the M4 button-top screws to go through. I did another test print in PLA of the whole thing to make sure the screws fit. And with that, it was time to make the different variations. That's right, I'm not just making a single eyepiece holder, I'm making 4. But here I realized we have a problem. I thought I could just copy the finished object and cut new holes in each version. Easy, right? Wrong. Turns out parametric design is not like Blender. In Blender, objects exist. In parametric software, objects only exist if you export them out. You're not sculpting, you're writing instructions that the computer follows step by step, like a recipe. Copying something, it has to be part of the instructions. Can you see the problem yet? Pause it here and go ahead and drop your guesses in the comments. The holes I made for the eyepieces were part of my original sketch. So that one small step for me was one giant leap in the wrong direction for also me. I had to go and delete the circles from the original sketch and then have the Boolean modifier that merges everything together moved up. That gave me the base object, which I was then able to transform 3 times while copying the original to get 4 bases. I then created circle sketches on top of each to cut out the actual holes by extruding those sketches through the base. I printed one of them out using the 0.2mm strong settings in Bamboo Studio with BambuLab ASA. I slathered the build plate in glue like sunscreen on Tatooine, but the part warped. So I cleaned the build plate and added a brim, and it warped. So I added mouse ears, and it warped. So I cleaned the build plate again, made the mouse ears bigger, set the space between the mouse ears and the part to be 0, and I ran out of ASA mid-print. So I switched to PLA, which is much less prone to warping, and it warped. So this space-based project seems to have a warp problem. I switched build plates to the textured PEI plate and raised the bed temp to 60°C, and even rounded the back corners of the model to try to spread the forces caused by filament cooling and contracting. This last step was theoretically easy, because all changes should simply propagate. But fun fact? No. I had to change the definition of the plane that was used to mirror the supports first, and then it all propagated nicely. All this got to a point where the corners sometimes lift off the build plate a little bit, but also it still works. In fact, all of the other attempts, with the exception of the first one, would arguably work because they were flat enough, although I couldn't actually say that for certain until I mounted it up. I used the straight edge to draw a line down to figure out where to place it horizontally so it would match the existing eyepiece holder, and then used a level to make sure it was level, and drew a dot where I needed to drill. I used a 3/32 inch bit to drill a pilot hole and partially installed the M4x16mm button top screw, leaving the holder able to rotate. I leveled it again and marked and drilled the second hole and then tightened everything up. And with that, it was ready for the Glam Shots. The set of screws I used can be purchased on Amazon, and the designs for the eyepiece holder can be found on MakerWorld for free. The links for all of that are in the description. I hope you enjoyed this first voyage into functional 3D printing. If you did, be sure to give the video a like. Also, be sure to subscribe and maybe check out this video, which the algorithm, thinks you'll really gravitate towards.